Our program tonight is with Myra. I'm afraid I mess up your name. I was at a genealogy program in Zion about 2 months ago. I did a talk on tracing your family through cookbooks, and then Myra was the next one on Lake Michigan's Western Shore. And I was absolutely thrilled with it because she told the story of how the Midwest participated in the American Revolution, which is not that broadly known. And with the 250th anniversary, there's a common question of why are we weren't participating, but in fact we did. So I'll turn it over to you, Myra.
Okay, thank you very much, and I appreciate you having me here to talk today. And so I'll start with my introduction. I am a member of the Zion Genealogy Society, which is now merging with Lake County, so it'll be all Lake County Genealogy Society. I've been doing genealogy research primarily in Michigan and Indiana for about 20 years with a focus on Belgium immigrants. To understand genealogy and the methods of research, I think it's important to understand the history of the area and the people. Therefore, I'm interested in the history of the Great Lakes region. In addition to genealogy, my interests include fly fishing and quilting. I'm a member of Trout Unlimited. In fact, I've worked in the Highland Park ravines. And I volunteered with an organization called Reeling and Healing, which hosts fly fishing retreats for women that are impacted by cancer. I'm actively involved in the Quilts of Valor Foundation, providing healing quilts to veterans and members of the armed services. And I retired from Abbott in 2012.
And that's the thing. My father is a member of Trout Unlimited in Michigan as well. So that's kind of interesting.
Oh, that's good.
Well, thank you.
I was thinking about this, as we celebrate our 250th anniversary as a nation, you know, we consider, well, what do we know about the battles and the military and everything that happened during the revolution? Maybe your vision is Washington crossing the Delaware or the Redcoats standing there with their muskets in their hands. But what I'd like to do is draw your attention to the Great Lakes region and consider the history here. So if you look at this map, you'll see that, there's the original colonies. And then there's the Great Lakes region that's kind of in this other shade of light yellow. And that's really the area that we're going to talk about. That part of the country did not join the United States until 1783. But that doesn't mean that there weren't European settlers here at the time. This is a little bit of a timeline for that early part of our region. In the 1600s, we had explorers here. There was fur trade. We had expeditions and shipping. And then the American Revolution happened like in 1776. Then Chicago was founded in 1790. So considering this timeline, we'll just go through and talk about what was happening in the region. There was a lot of benefits in the Great Lakes of travel by water, the proximity to fish and game for support. And there were a lot of people that were living in the Great Lakes region along the western shores of Lake Michigan, in fact, and in other areas. So let's talk about Marquette and Joliet. 1673, they had their first outing, their voyage. They crossed portions of what is now Illinois. They extended the reach of New France in America. The French had dominated the Mississippi River Valley for almost a century, and they surrendered this area of North America to Great Britain in 1763. So before that, it was all French. And, for a long time, this region, as you know, with these waterways, etc., was really considered the breadbasket of French Louisiana. Marquette and Joliet entered the Wisconsin River in June of 1673, as commemorated by the Daughters of the American Revolution. This monument is in Portage, Wisconsin. So now let's talk about the forts and the ports. Green Bay, just up the road here, obviously was an area that had a lot of different native tribes. And then Nicolay came here in 1634 to actually, found the state. I mean, the city of Green Bay, the fort at that time. And then it was taken over by the British and then the United States. Fort Detroit, with the Ottawa, Huron, and Potawatomi, was first settled in 1701 by the French. Then it was held by the British until 1796 and then turned over to the United States then. And Fort Michilimackinac, up there at the tip of the mitten in Michigan, was originally French in 1715 founding, and then British, and then the British moved the fort from the mainland over to Mackinac Island. And so this is something that that we had talked about, Catherine and I had talked about, and that is that if you're looking for historical records, genealogical records for Mackinac Island or for Fort Michilimackinac, you go to Detroit, because the region up north was considered to be kind of an outpost of Detroit. And so all those historical records are in Detroit. That's just a little tidbit. And then this area was actually considered part of the province of Quebec. And, you think about the influence of the French that we see today in the name places and the river names, Des Plaines River, etc. And in fact, the name Illinois is derived from the word Illinois, which means men or warriors. And then it was made plural by the French by adding the OIS. So that's how our state got its name. Moving to shipping. In prior to 1679, there were different kinds of smaller canoe or different kinds of conveyances that were used along the waterways. And then in 1679, LaSalle had built the Griffin. It was built over by Lake Erie, entered Lake Erie in August of 1679, en route to Green Bay. So it went up and over and got to Green Bay, unloaded all of its supplies and things, loaded back up, left Green Bay September 18th in 1679, and was never seen again. For more than 50 years, shipping really went to a standstill in the Great Lakes region. That ship has never been found. And, using even today's modern techniques, they cannot find it. So they don't know where it went. So for shipping in the Great Lakes, then there were a couple of schooners that were built on Lake Ontario, and they came up and around, and other vessels came through the waterways. There was a 25-ton ship built in Sault Ste. Marie, and it traveled on Lake Superior. And, it carried copper for the mining interests up there. And that helped to develop the ore industry. Then we moved to the fur trade. And I think when we think of fur trade, we think of, those guys up in Canada that ran around collecting furs. Well, it wasn't just in Canada. And in fact, Um, it wasn't just a practice of the early settlers. It was a huge industry. It spanned 150 to 200 years, and it was really critical in the development of North America and brought a lot of fine people, trade, and finance to North America that would not have been here otherwise. And it was a lucrative practice. So, for example, one beaver pelt would bring 300 to 500% increase. So that's pretty significant. I mean, if we were getting a 300% return on investment, we'd be pretty happy. So the fur merchants from England and France, primarily England and France, brought whatever they had, glass beads, silver items, household items, whatever, and traded to the Native Americans for their furs, but also there were a number of Europeans that did their own trapping and had their furs. It was a combination of beaver, mink, etc. And when you think about a supply chain, because today, we understand ourselves the impact of the supply chain. So when you think about the supply chain back then, it was the Europeans who invested in the whole industry. They financed the ships. There were sailors that made money, dock workers, merchants, trappers, etc. And all of those people benefited from the fur trade. This map has some of the routes, the fur trade routes that are shown here. Obviously they're going to follow along waterways because that was the way that we moved things back then. And looking at this map, and this is like around the 1600s, it shows you the different rivers and the trade routes that were used. Most of these were learned by communicating with the indigenous people. Those people knew where to get things, how to get things, how to survive the climate, all the different ways to live amongst the land. And we being the Europeans, learned all that from the indigenous people. The furs were shipped through the Straits of Mackinac. That's this part right here. I don't know if you can see my cursor. And then out through what we know today as the St. Lawrence Seaway. Sometimes they came up along the rivers, like the Mississippi River and those other rivers too, and went down toward the Gulf. Chicago, which is right here, was one of the areas where the fur traders stopped. It was, considered kind of a port or a stopping place at the time. So for Chicago now, this Chicago was considered to have its first settler, the non-indigenous settler, DuSable. And if you go to the south side of Chicago, there's the DuSable museum and stuff there. So, most of the settlements along Lake Michigan happened more after the war, the Revolutionary War. But the first known permanent settler staked his claim in the Chicago area. It doesn't mean that other people weren't there, but this is the instance where he staked a claim and established this trading post. So it was really establishing the Chicago city. DuSable was a descendant of African heritage and French heritage. And there's not really a lot known about him before 1770. But during his career, he settled and traded all around on the Great Lakes and in what was then called the Illinois country. This area changed hands several times between France, Britain, Spain, and the United States. So um, who knows what it was being called at the time, but it's the same general area. DuSable married a Native American woman, and they had 2 children. But then during the American Revolution in 1779, he was arrested by the British under suspicion of being a sympathizer to the Patriots. And then in the 1780s, he worked for the British Lieutenant Governor of Michilimackinac and lived on an estate over in St. Clair, Michigan. So even though he founded Chicago, he didn't stay here for a real long time. Now we've talked a bit about the Native Americans and, really what was their role? These are the people who lived on the land, who knew the western shore of Lake Michigan, who knew the customs, they knew the environment, they knew how to live here. But they didn't really have permanent settlements. There were not really towns or villages of any size from this period of time that we think about as a town. They had the Native Americans had trade routes, and they had their favorite stopping places. And some of those became the basis for roads and towns, but they didn't really have towns per se. Because the Native Americans were so familiar with the land and the resources, they eventually became critical parts of the development of North America, and especially in the fur trade. The Native Americans knew where to find the beaver, they knew how to survive in the wilderness, and without their help, the French and British would never have made the immense amounts of money that they did. But when you think about the Native Americans, they didn't have a political alignment or a loyalty to British, French, or colonies. They didn't care. Those were all people that, had come to their area. There were some battles actually in the Illinois country. You can see that in this map here, what's called the Illinois country. George Rogers Clark and others surveyed this whole region, and they were the ones who helped to secure this land in the final treaty of the war. They're the ones who mapped it out, understood it, and were instrumental in claiming this part of the country for the United States. In this map, you can note here's Fort Detroit and here's Fort Ouiatenon. If you haven't been to Fort Ouiatenon, they have a really nice festival. It's called the Feast of the Hunter's Moon. And you can go there today and learn about, well, not today, but the fort's open, but you can go to the Feast of the Hunter's Moon, and they have reenactments of the voyagers landing, of the encampments and all that was taking place at that time frame, before and after, or before and during the American Revolution, mostly before. It's just a very fun outing if you want to go down there. It's not that far away. I just want to make sure that people understand that even though Illinois wasn't a state until later, when you think of this area and the Great Lakes region, you have to consider not about the battles that we think about from the East Coast, but think also about the finances, the value of the land, the supply chain, and how this region was able to impact the outcomes of the American Revolution. These are some of the references that I used, and it wasn't me. So I just want to acknowledge that my sister Lois, who's online, did a lot of the research for this talk. Here's a couple pictures for you. This is my sister Lois in her reenacting outfit. These are two of my sisters, and this is a sister. And then Over here is the Fife and Drum Corps, First Michigan Colonial Fife and Drum Corps. This is my niece. And I believe this picture was taken actually at Fort Ouiatenon. So if you want to learn more like in person about this history, there's a lot of different ways that you can, different feasts and festivals and places where you can go and really get the firsthand experience of it. It's because of this history that I had living in the state of Michigan and, parents that were interested and, the members of the First Michigan Colonial Fife and Drum Corps. My sister was one of the founding members. And because of all this is what continuously sparks my interest in the history of this region. And, I think I need to acknowledge that my interest in history and genealogy came from two people, and that's my parents. So they used to come behind the Fife and Drum Corps in their followers' outfits and their camp follower outfits and, support the group. So I want to thank you for your attention and for the opportunity to speak to you tonight. And with that, I'd like to answer any questions.
So this ship that disappeared, the Griffin,
Yeah,
was that on Lake Michigan or?
it was between Green Bay. It left Green Bay and disappeared. So it's Lake Michigan.
Okay.
It's someplace right out here. I'm just saying.
No, because well, all of the Great Lakes, when there's a storm, they're pretty dangerous.
Yeah,
Um,
there's a whole industry around diving for shipwrecks
oh yeah,
in the Great Lakes. Yeah, it's a whole like pastime and industry. But this particular ship they have never found.
because it's not like it could be easily stolen. I don't know,
Don't know where it went.
but it's certainly because I've heard of Lake Michigan, as it's safer to be out in the ocean when there's a storm than it is on the Great Lakes because you have lots of opportunity to kind of hit ashore.
Well, and there's a lot of lakes that are worse than others. I'm just saying. Lake Superior is very treacherous because of the waves, you know.
Okay. Are there questions in the chat? That's what I need to look. Um, so far, people are speechless. Isn't
I
that
have a
amazing?
question. Where is
Great.
that festival at? I don't know how to pronounce the name of it.
Oh, Fort Ouiatenon. It's near Lafayette, Indiana.
Oh, okay. I couldn't picture it in the map. Okay, near Lafayette. All right.
Yeah, it's not that far away.
It sounds interesting.
It's very interesting.
And weren't there
Yeah,
battles from the American Revolution that were on the lower tip of Illinois?
there were, but lower tip of Illinois.
Yeah, because Illinois was developed from the tip up. I always look at it as being a ballet shoe, but that's just me.
Most of the counties in Illinois started in the southern half in that little small section down there. In 1818, they were all right at the bottom. There was hardly anything at the top of Illinois.
Well, a lot of it was French.
As it was French territory.
hmm
Do you recall what the names of those forts were that were in those battles were that were in the south of Illinois? Sorry, I have a friend who, if she was here, she would probably whip it out of the tip of her tongue, but don't worry, don't worry. Any other questions? Vicky, I'm glad you jumped in.
I didn't get to pay attention to that much. I was so busy the day she gave it this presentation in
Oh,
March. So I
Right.
wanted to, I was busy. So I wanted to check it out and see. I thought
Yeah,
it
she
was
was
interesting.
hosting.
Yeah.
yeah, and you're the president of the Waukegan Genealogical Society?
Of the Zion Genealogical Society. Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, that's okay.
And the
I'm
Waukegan Historical Society,
I'm
right?
on the board for the Waukegan Historical Society.
But you were
I'm
once
not
president.
the president of that. That's way above my pay grade.
So you talked about materials being in Detroit related to Fort Mackinac and that area. Do you know what repository there can be found in mostly, or what institution?
Um, Not offhand. I think it depends on what you're looking for.
Okay.
But I think the Lois, do you know where they are?
All you have to do is unmute, ma'am. I think.
I think some of them are, a bunch of them are in Detroit, but there is also, I believe, a repository up by Mackinac.
Hmm.
For the newer ones. Yeah.
Mhm.
But do you know where they are in Detroit? Is it the library or
No, I don't know.
there's a book in the in the Zion Library that you can consult that tells you where they are.
Okay. I just
I just know that because I read it there, but I don't remember the location. Yeah.
Fair
And I'd
enough.
just like to say that there's a lot of good music about all of this, especially from a guy named Lee Murdoch.
Oh, yes. He gets a little irritated when you ask for the wreck of uh, the
Edmund
Fitzgerald wreck.
Fitzgerald.
Yes.
That's not his.
No, I know it's not
No,
his,
it's not.
but I went to one of his events and we had him sing it, and then we had him sing it again. And
Oh God.
I know, I
He
know.
has better songs than that. The Edmund Fitzgerald song goes on and on and on, much as I like Gordon Lightfoot.
Well, I think he would rather we focused on his music and not that one.
But you know
Highland Park.
what? Myra's right. There has been so many tragic shipwrecks in the Great Lakes. And I know mainly Lake Superior wrecks and probably Lake Michigan. I'm not as informed about the other ones, but there's been some terrible wrecks that, we've lost people and
Well,
Over
coal
in
and
all along the Wisconsin coast.
mhm, mhm.
on Lake Huron, there is I don't know, there's an actual term for it, I can't remember, but it's like a designated graveyard
Mhm.
on the lake that you can go and do a glass bottom boat tour. I think it's out of Alpena, and that gives
actually
you all the history of that area.
there's also, I don't know, the same one. There's a glass bottom tour in on Lake Superior. You can take out a Munising. I took my son on it years ago, and I was very disappointed because it was just like a little open up a little cabinet and peek through the glass at the bottom. It wasn't like really a glass bottom boat. Maybe the one by Alpena is. I don't know.
Oh, the one by Alpena, there is a huge viewing area. And, they're pointing out, like they'll stop and they'll say, okay, now look at this part and look at that part. And then in your head, you can put the ship back together.
Well,
Yeah.
They need to
you
learn
can
that.
kayak off of Highland Park, and we've seen shipwrecks when the water is clear.
Oh, wow.
I think the high wasn't the highest level of death was that shipwreck off of Highland Park in the 1860s.
The Lady Elgin?
Yeah.
No, the Lady Elgin was off of a pier.
Where's here?
A pier, Pier. It wasn't in the middle of the lake.
No, it was near Highland Park. And like in
Yeah.
Highland Park. And then the bodies sort of drifted south and ended up in Winnetka or Wilmette. But some bodies
Yeah.
also ended up, and there Nancy has in our archives this young lady whose father was the lighthouse tenant or lighthouse keeper.
The name is Monahan, and her recollections are digitized and available on the Illinois Digital Archive and DP Digital Library of America. Just search Highland Park Lighthouse or Port Clinton Lighthouse, and you'll come up with a very fascinating description of from her as a child of watching this all happen.
Wow.
And at that point, the lighthouse had already been decommissioned.
So he didn't have his light. So the family was still living there, but they didn't have their light on when this happened.
There's a lesson in that.
Yeah.
Keep the lights on. Although with the currents, it's not always that easy.
I'm sure.
Any more questions or comments or additional information?
Did you stop the recording?
No, I just let it run. Is that okay?
Oh, yeah, I'm just,
It's just the icon went away.
okay.
Oh, it's
Oh,
still
no,
there.
the
It just kind of
icon-
fades out sometimes if you're not you can't see it always. It kind of times out
Mhm.
sometimes.
Oh,
But
But that boat that flipped on the Chicago River, if it were in the Great Lakes, that would have been the highest death toll.
oh, you're
But
talking
it
about
was,
the one with the Montgomery Ward people?
Yeah.
That was really tragic. Yeah.
I think, was it also General Electric people as well?
Oh,
I don't
maybe.
know.
All I knew was Montgomery Ward, but it could have been anything.
It was a lot of people.
Yeah.
It was a lot of people.
The lesson is never go below, stay on deck.
I was on a storm on Lake Michigan in a sailboat, and I kept getting yelled at to go below. I just wouldn't. Largely because I was afraid of the ship flipped. I couldn't escape. I would
Right.
just be caught. Um,
I'd be afraid too.
yeah, yeah. It's also why I don't even want to consider one of those boats that people go one, I don't know what.
A kayak, yeah, me too. That's
Yes.
why I don't. Everybody said, I said, what if I turn over? And they always said, oh, you go like that and flip. Oh no, I'd be stuck
That's
upside down.
exactly
No, but
exact.
point is, you could hang on to the kayak and tread water.
and go with a group too. Don't go alone. That's I think the most important thing.
Yeah. Tell me that. I do that.
I don't know.
It's just scary. Just scary.
But it's beautiful.
It's
I bet it
beautiful
is.
when
Yeah.
it's, I mean, kayaking or the lake.
Kayak.
Both.
But I only go when the
Yeah.
water is flat.
Lori Marston noted in the chat that the Eastland is the
Yeah.
That's what
Yes,
I was
that's it.
talking about.
Yeah.
Yes.
There were
But if
more
it had been out in, go ahead.
there were more passengers killed on the Eastland than on the Titanic because the Eastland only had 4 crew members. The rest were all paid passengers, or they were paid by the Western Electric Company, whatever you want to call it. So there were actually more people died, more passengers died on the Eastland than on the Titanic.
And it's amazing because the Titanic was way out in the water and the Eastland was literally right by the dock.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Hey,
And
hey
the
Jeff. Hey
yeah,
Jeff, wasn't the Eastland top heavy because they had all these extra
that's right. It was because of the
boats?
Titanic that
Mm-hmm.
because of the Titanic, one of the issues of the Titanic, not enough lifeboats. So they began retrofitting ships with lifeboats. And where did they put them? On the very top of the ship. So that these heavy wooden lifeboats. So when all the people went on one side to wave goodbye to their friends on shore, that weight of the people with the heavy lifeboats up high is what turned it over. And so they actually lost more passengers on the Eastland than on the Titanic because the Titanic had a lot of crew members. And of course, the first people to go to the lifeboats were supposed to be passengers, and they probably did. So a lot of those people on the Titanic were crew members in addition to the passengers.
There's a
You're,
website for the Eastland that's run by Karen Brennan, I think. So if you want to look it up, it has a lot of good information on there.
but it's amazing that like kids in school don't learn about it. Like everybody knows the Titanic even before the movie. But there's a remarkable lack of education unless you're interested and search it out.
Well, the thing about the Titanic was the first of all, it was a maiden voyage on a well-known ship line. I mean,
Yeah.
and these were all a lot of the first class passengers. They were on the maiden voyage to New York. Some of the wealthiest people in New York were on that ship. And that's another reason they were all very prominent people that were going down when that ship turned. And of course, because it went on one side, all the lifeboats on the other side were useless because they weren't anywhere, they weren't in a position to be lowered into the water. So on the Titanic, only the lifeboats on one side really, I think, were could be used. That's
Hmm.
that's what I understand.
And the Eastland, the education related to that event is really that, I don't know, foundation or that group. They have really busted their butt making sure that people knew about it. Because
Yeah,
it really
July.
could have been a
Yeah,
quietly observed, but it's not quietly observed. It's
there's still a memorial sign next to the LaSalle Street Bridge. I believe it's
Yeah.
on the Wacker Drive side. That explains that 24th of July. That was the date. 15, I think. Yeah, right during the war. Yeah.
And it was people from Montgomery wards. It was like a reward trip.
No, wait a minute. I don't think it was Montgomery Ward.
I would think it was Western Electric.
Oh, Western.
Western
Yeah,
Electric,
Maybe
that.
Western Electric.
I
Yeah,
said
you're right.
General Electric.
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
Yes, yes.
Something was Montgomery ward. What am I thinking of? I don't know.
I don't know. He had that big, those two big buildings on Chicago Avenue. Those were Montgomery Ward next to the river. The big white buildings with a statue on top of what's her name? I don't know, some goddess of something on Chicago Avenue and the river in Chicago. That was all Montgomery Ward. Uh, those were Montgomery Ward buildings.
The
Good.
gentleman speaking is Jeff Stern.
Well,
He's with the Highland Park Historical Society as well with the Chicago Fire Museum.
yeah.
He is our encyclopedia on 2 feet.
Well, I'm fifth
He's a
generation
wonderful guy.
Chicago. I have great nephews who are seventh generation Chicago, so we have a lot of old, history that we lived through. Somebody in the family lived through it.
Jeff, are you the picture with the window?
Where am I?
The
In the
Stupi cabin picture, yeah.
Oh yeah.
Oh, that's what that is.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's right. I'm the equivalent of that old cabin. Yeah. Stoopy cabin. Yeah.
If I have to go, Myra, thank you so much. I really appreciated listening to it again. You did a great job.
Absolutely.
You're most
Thanks,
welcome.
Catherine, for letting me know about it. I appreciate it.
And I was really glad you had her in your program, or I wouldn't have known about her. So there we go. We've ended all the thank yous we could do. And Lois, thank you very much too. It's Lois, right?
Yes,
Yes.
and you're most welcome. I had a lot of fun doing research and working with Myra on it.
Well, it was terrific. It was very good. Thank you so much. Any more questions? I think we've done a good job of exercising this topic. All right. Well, thank you very much.
All right. Thank you.
All
Bye.
right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.